Captain Jiwon stood on the bridge of the New Seoul and watched the stars through the main screen. The ship moved slowly through space, its engines humming softly as they traveled toward the Andromeda Spiral. She had been captain of this research vessel for 3 years now, and every day still felt like a gift. The humans had joined the Galactic Coalition 50 years ago, and ships like hers represented everything good about that partnership. They were explorers, scientists, and peace, makers in a galaxy that had seen too much war. Minho walked onto the bridge carrying a cup of coffee and a data pad. He was the chief engineer, a man who could fix anything and had kept the New Seoul running perfectly for the entire mission. His dark hair was messy from working in the engine room, and he had that satisfied look he always got when the ship was running well. He handed Jiwon the data pad and took a sip of his coffee. "The exotic matter readings are getting stronger," he said. "We should reach the source in about 6 hours. Whatever is out there, it is putting out energy signatures I have never seen before." Jiwon looked at the numbers on the pad. The readings were incredible. If they were right, this discovery could change everything about how ships traveled between stars. Faster than light travel was possible now, but it was slow and used massive amounts of energy. This exotic matter could make it faster and cheaper. It could connect the galaxy in ways that were impossible before. Hyuna came onto the bridge next. She was the ship's xenobiologist, an expert in alien life forms who had studied creatures from dozens of worlds. She was small and quiet, with kind eyes that always seemed to be thinking about something interesting. She carried a tablet showing images of crystalline formations they had detected near the exotic matter source. "The crystals are definitely artificial," she said, showing them the pictures. "Something built these structures. They are too perfect to be natural. The patterns suggest a level of technology we have never encountered before." Somin looked up from her communications station. She was young for her position, but had earned her place through skill and hard work. Her job was to handle all contact with other ships and alien species, and she was known for her ability to understand different cultures and languages. She had been monitoring all frequencies since they entered this sector of space. "I am picking up some unusual signals," she said. "They are not from any known species in the Coalition database. The signals are coming from the same direction as the exotic matter source." Daehyun stepped forward from his position at the tactical station. He was the ship's weapons specialist, though the New Seoul carried only defensive systems. The Coalition had strict rules about military vessels in neutral. Space and research ships were supposed to be peaceful. Daehyun had been a soldier before joining the research service, and he sometimes seemed restless in his current role. Still, he was good at his job and kept the ship's defenses ready just in case. "Captain, I recommend we proceed carefully," he said. "Unknown signals usually mean unknown ships, and unknown ships can mean trouble. Our defensive systems are working perfectly, but we are not equipped for serious combat." Jiwon nodded. She trusted her crew completely. They had worked together for years, and each of them was the best at what they did. The New Seoul was not just a ship to them. It was their home, and they were like a family. That was how humans worked best, in small groups where everyone cared about everyone else. "We continue as planned," she decided. "But we stay alert. This discovery is too important to turn back now. If there are other ships out there, we will try to make contact." The Coalition has always believed in peaceful exploration. The next few hours passed quietly. The crew went about their normal duties while the ship moved closer to their destination. Hyuna studied the crystal formations and tried to understand their purpose. Minho monitored the exotic matter readings and prepared the ship's sensors for detailed scans. Somin kept listening to the unknown signals, trying to find patterns that might help them understand the source. Daehyun ran diagnostics on the defensive systems and hoped they would not be needed. Jiwon spent her time thinking about what this discovery could mean. Humans had always been known as good researchers and diplomats in the Coalition. Other species respected their intelligence and their desire for peace. They were not the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced, but they were curious and persistent. They asked good questions and found creative solutions to problems. This exotic matter could be the discovery that showed the galaxy what humans were truly capable of. When they finally reached the source, everyone gathered on the bridge to see it. The main screen showed a sight that took their breath away. Massive crystals floated in space, each one the size of a small moon. They glowed with inner light and seemed to pulse with energy. Between them, streams of exotic matter flowed like rivers of pure power. It was beautiful and strange and unlike anything they had ever seen. Incredible, Hyuna whispered. The energy patterns are stable. These crystals have been here for thousands of years, maybe longer. They are like a natural power plant, converting matter into exotic energy. Minho was already working at his station, taking detailed readings. If we could understand how they work, we could build similar structures. The applications would be unlimited. Faster ships, more powerful computers, maybe even new forms of communication across vast distances. Soman suddenly looked up from her station with concern. Captain, I am detecting multiple ships approaching our position. They are big, and they are coming fast. Their signal patterns do not match anything in our database. The main screen shifted to show space around them. Dark shapes were moving toward the new Sol, their hulls reflecting the light from the crystals. As they got closer, the crew could see that these were warships, bristling with weapons and armor. They were larger than any coalition vessel and had a design that spoke of violence and conquest. Unknown vessel, you will stop your activities immediately, came a voice over the communications channel. The translation systems worked, but the tone was cold and threatening. I am War Commander Thexvar of the Vorthak Empire. You are trespassing in our territory and interfering with our property. Jiwon stepped forward and signaled for Soman to open a channel. This is Captain Jiwon of the research vessel New Sol, representing the Galactic Coalition. We were not aware this sector was claimed territory. We are conducting peaceful scientific research on the exotic matter formations. We would be happy to share our findings with your people. The response came quickly and without any warmth. The Vorthak Empire does not negotiate with inferior species. You will surrender your vessel and submit to protective custody. Your research will be confiscated for the good of the Empire. Jiwon felt a chill run down her spine. She had dealt with aggressive species before, but there was something different about these aliens. Their words carried a weight of absolute certainty, as if they could not imagine being refused. I am sorry, but we cannot agree to those terms, she said calmly. The Coalition has agreements with all major powers in this region. Perhaps we can contact your government and work out a peaceful solution. What happened next changed everything. The alien ships moved into attack formation around the new Sol, their weapons powering up. On the main screen, the crew could see another ship in the distance. It was a civilian transport, one of the big colony ships that carried families between human worlds. The ship was called the New Busan, and it held 30,000 people. You seem to misunderstand the situation, War Commander Thexvar said. Let me demonstrate the consequences of defying the Vorthak Empire. The alien warships turned toward the colony ship and opened fire. The New Sol's crew watched in horror as the peaceful transport was torn apart by enemy weapons. 30,000 lives ended in seconds, including the families of crew members aboard the New Sol. Hyuna screamed as she realized her husband and daughter had been on that ship. The other crew members stood frozen, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Now you understand, the alien commander said. Surrender immediately or more humans will die. But something had changed in the eyes of the New Sol's crew. The shock was fading, replaced by something cold and dangerous. Jiwon looked at her people and saw a transformation beginning. These aliens had made a terrible mistake. They thought they had broken human spirit with their show of force. Instead, they had awakened something far worse than anything they could imagine. The silence on the bridge of the New Sol lasted only a few seconds. but it felt like hours. Hyuna stood perfectly still, staring at the empty space where the new Busan had been moments before. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. But something fundamental had changed in her eyes. The woman who had spent her career studying life was now thinking about death in ways she had never considered before. Ji-won watched her crew and felt the change happening in herself too. The diplomatic training that had guided her for years was still there, but it was being pushed aside by something much older and more primal. She thought about the families on that ship, about the children who would never grow up, about the dreams that had been destroyed in an instant. The aliens expected surrender, but they had no idea what they had actually accomplished. "Somin," Ji-won said quietly, her voice steady but different somehow. "Open a channel to Earth. Priority 1 emergency code." Somin's fingers moved across her, controls with mechanical precision. Her usual cheerful expression was gone, replaced by a cold focus that made her look older. When the channel opened, she nodded to her captain. "Earth Command, this is Captain Ji-won of the New Seoul," she began. "The Vorthak Empire has just destroyed the colony ship New Busan with all hands. 30,000 civilians are dead. They used this act as a demonstration of power to force our surrender." The response from Earth came quickly, the voice of Admiral Taiho crackling through the communication system. "Captain, confirm your last transmission. Did you say 30,000 civilians?" "Confirmed," Ji-won replied. The Vorthak commander called it a lesson about the consequences of defying their empire. They specifically targeted non-combatants to break our morale. There was a long pause before Admiral Taiho spoke again. When he did, his voice carried a tone that Ji-won had never heard before. "Understood, Captain. You are to gather all possible intelligence on Vorthak capabilities and transmit it immediately. Earth Command is implementing Protocol 7. Somin looked up sharply. Protocol 7 was something they had learned about in training but never expected to see used. It was the authorization for total war, the complete suspension of normal human rules of engagement. It meant that the peaceful, diplomatic humanity that the galaxy knew was about to disappear. Minho stepped forward from his engineering station. The friendly man who had been joking about coffee just hours before was gone. In his place stood someone calculating and cold, already thinking about how to turn his knowledge of human technology into something deadly. "Captain, I need access to the manufacturing bay," he said. "Our mining equipment can be modified. The particle beam drills we use for asteroid surveys can be reconfigured as weapons. The industrial fabricators can produce components that were never intended for peaceful purposes." Hyuna turned away from the empty space where her family had died and walked to her science station. Her movements were precise and methodical as she began accessing databases of alien biology. The woman who had devoted her life to understanding and protecting alien species was now studying them for weaknesses. "The Vorthak physiology shows several vulnerability points," she said, her voice emotionless. "Their exoskeleton has weak joints that could be exploited. Their respiratory system is complex and could be disrupted with targeted biological agents. I will need samples of their atmosphere and genetic material to develop effective weapons." Dae-hyun was already working at his tactical station, but his focus had shifted completely. Instead of defensive preparations, he was analyzing the Vorthak ships for attack vectors. His military training was taking over, pushing aside years of peaceful service. "Their ships are heavily armored but rely on centralized power systems," he reported. "If we could disable their main reactors, their weapons and life support would fail simultaneously. I am identifying targeting priorities for maximum damage with minimum resources." Captain Ji-won listened to her crew and realized that the transformation was not just happening to them. All across human space, the same change was beginning. Research stations were becoming weapons laboratories. Trade ships were being retrofitted with military hardware. Human diplomats were withdrawing from peace negotiations, their entire demeanor shifting from accommodating to something much more dangerous. The Vorthak ships were still surrounding the new Sol, waiting for an answer to their demands. War Commander. Thexavar seemed confident that the destruction of the colony ship had achieved its purpose. He had no understanding of what human psychology was like under extreme stress. His species responded to overwhelming force with submission, but humans were different. Unknown alien vessel, Jiwan said into the communications channel. You have made a serious mistake. You believe that destroying innocent people will make us weak and afraid. You are wrong. The alien commander's response was filled with amusement. Your words are meaningless, human. Your species is known throughout the galaxy for your weakness. You are researchers and diplomats, not warriors. You will surrender because you have no choice. Jiwan smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. You are correct that we are researchers and diplomats. What you do not understand is what happens when researchers and diplomats decide to study the most efficient ways to destroy their enemies. While the conversation continued, Somin was receiving messages from human ships throughout the sector. The news of the new Busan's destruction was spreading rapidly, and the response was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human vessels that had been carrying supplies or conducting peaceful missions were suddenly changing course. Research teams were abandoning their projects and heading toward human military bases. Even civilian ships were requesting weapon upgrades and tactical information. Minho had moved to the manufacturing bay and was working with frightening efficiency. The same skills that had kept the new Sol running perfectly were now being applied to creating instruments of war. Mining drills became particle cannons. Navigation sensors became targeting systems. Medical equipment was converted into biological. Weapon delivery systems. The modifications will be complete in 6 hours, he reported. After that, this research vessel will have the firepower of a military destroyer. More importantly, I am documenting every change we make. Every human ship in the fleet will be able to implement the same upgrades. Yuna was deep in her biological analysis, her scientific mind working on problems she had never considered before. The same methodical approach that had made her an excellent xenobiologist was now focused on finding ways to exploit alien weaknesses. She was not just studying the Vorthak anymore, but every species in the galaxy that might pose a threat to humanity. I am identifying genetic markers common to aggressive species, she said. If we can develop targeted biological weapons, we can ensure that peaceful species are not harmed while hostile ones face immediate consequences for their actions. Daehyun was monitoring communications from other human military units and coordinating tactical information. What he was seeing made him realize that humanity's response was going to be far more comprehensive than anyone expected. Captain, I'm receiving reports from human forces throughout the galaxy, he said. Every military unit is being activated. Reserve forces are being called up. Even civilian security forces are being integrated into the military command structure. This is not just a response to an attack. This is preparation for total war. The Vorthak commander was growing impatient with the delay. Human vessel, you have had sufficient time to consider your position. Surrender immediately or face the same fate as the colony ship. Jiwan looked at her crew, seeing the cold determination in their eyes. The people who had been peaceful researchers that morning were now something entirely different. They had not become mindless with rage or broken with grief. Instead, they had become calculating and methodical, applying their intelligence and skills to the problem of destroying their enemies. War Commander Thexvar, she said into the communications channel. You wanted to teach us about power. You wanted to show us what happens when someone defies your empire. Consider this your first lesson in what happens when humans decide to teach others about consequences. The new Sol began moving slowly toward the edge of the sensor range, not fleeing, but positioning itself strategically. The Vorthak ships followed, confident that they were pursuing defeated enemies. They had no idea that they were actually being led into a trap that was already being prepared throughout human space. In the hours that followed, human ships began appearing throughout the sector. They were not military vessels, but research ships, cargo haulers, and civilian transports that had been rapidly converted into something much more dangerous. Each ship carried crews that had undergone the same transformation as the people aboard the New Soul. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their numbers, but their ability to become absolutely ruthless when the people they cared about were threatened, while never losing their capacity for intelligent planning and coordination. The Vorthak Empire had destroyed 30,000 humans to demonstrate their power. They were about to discover that they had actually signed their own death warrant. 3 days after the destruction of the New Busan, human space had become unrecognizable. Captain Jiwon stood in what had once been the New Soul's research laboratory and watched Minho work on devices that would have been impossible to imagine just days before. The cheerful engineer who had fixed coffee machines and calibrated sensors was now creating weapons that could crack planets open. The transformation was complete, but it was not the wild, emotional change that other species might have expected. Humans had not become savage beasts driven by rage. Instead, they had become something far more terrifying, logical, methodical killers who approached the destruction of their enemies with the same systematic precision they had once applied to scientific research. Yuna entered the laboratory carrying a data pad filled with information that made Jiwon's blood run cold. The gentle xenobiologist had spent the last 3 days creating detailed profiles of every Vorthak world, cataloging not just military targets but cultural sites, breeding grounds, and religious centers. Her work was comprehensive and thorough, the product of a brilliant mind that had decided to solve the problem of Vorthak existence permanently. "I have completed the analysis of their home system," Yuna said, her voice calm and professional. 17 worlds with a total population of approximately 43 billion. The primary breeding world contains their genetic archives and cultural heritage. The destruction of that single planet would effectively end their species even if military targets survived. Jiwon took the data pad and studied the information. The level of detail was incredible. Hyuna had identified the exact locations of Vorthak government centers, military academies, and even the sites where their leaders' families lived. It was not just a target list. It was a blueprint for genocide conducted with scientific precision. "What about civilian casualties?" Jiwon asked, though she already knew the answer. Yuna's expression did not change. "They established the rules of engagement when they destroyed the New Busan. Civilians are legitimate targets for the purpose of psychological warfare. I am simply applying their methodology more efficiently than they did." Somin looked up from her communication station, where she had been coordinating with human forces throughout the galaxy. The young woman who had once been known for her cheerful personality and cultural sensitivity was now managing a campaign of extermination with the efficiency of a logistics expert. "Admiral Taiho reports that human fleets are now in position. Around 12 Vorthak systems," she said. "All civilian populations have been evacuated from potential retaliation targets. Military production has increased by 800% in the last 72 hours. We are ready to begin operations on your command, Captain." The fact that command authority had somehow fallen to the crew of a research vessel showed how completely the situation had changed. The New Soul had become the symbol of human transformation, the ship where peaceful scientists had first demonstrated what their species was capable of when properly motivated. Now other human forces looked to them for guidance on how to conduct total war. Daehyun approached carrying a weapon that had never existed before in human history. It looked like a standard particle rifle, but Minho's modifications had turned it into something that could punch through starship armor. He set it down carefully and activated a holographic display showing tactical information. "The first phase will target their military infrastructure," he explained. "However, our intelligence indicates that Vorthak society does not separate military and civilian functions the way humans do. Their entire population is organized around warfare, which means every target is technically legitimate. Jiwon studied the tactical display and felt a strange sense of satisfaction. The same analytical skills that had made her an excellent research captain were now being applied to the problem of efficiently destroying an entire species. She was not driven by emotion or hatred, but by the cold logic of ensuring that no other species would ever consider humans easy targets. Minho finished his work on the latest weapon prototype and joined the group. His hands were steady, and his expression was focused as he explained the capabilities of human technology when it was no longer constrained by peaceful purposes. The terraforming equipment can be reconfigured to strip away planetary atmospheres, he said. Agricultural nanobots can be reprogrammed to destroy all organic matter they encounter. Even our medical technology can be turned into biological weapons that target specific genetic markers. The Vorthak believe they are superior warriors, but they have never faced an enemy that can turn the very building blocks of life against them. A communication alert sounded, and Somin activated the main screen to show an incoming transmission. The image that appeared was disturbing. A crystalline being with multiple limbs and a body that seemed to shift and flow like living glass. This was Ambassador Kell, one of the most respected mediators in the Galactic Coalition. Captain Jiwon, I am requesting permission to come aboard your vessel, the alien said. The Coalition is deeply concerned about the escalating situation with the Vorthak Empire. We believe that peaceful resolution is still possible if both sides are willing to negotiate. Jiwon exchanged glances with her crew. The idea of negotiation seemed almost quaint now, like suggesting that a forest fire could be reasoned with, but she was curious to see how other species would react to what humanity had become. Permission granted, Ambassador, she replied. However, I should warn you that this is no longer a research vessel. We have become something different. Ambassador Kell's shuttle docked with the new Soul 2 hours later. The crystalline being moved with graceful, flowing motions as it entered the main conference room where the human crew was waiting. Kell had negotiated peaceful solutions to dozens of galactic conflicts, always finding ways for different species to coexist. But nothing in its long experience had prepared it for what it encountered aboard the human ship. The ambassador expected to find humans consumed by grief and rage, emotions that could be channeled toward peaceful resolution. Instead, it found people who discussed the complete extermination of the Vorthak species with the same calm professionalism they might have once used to plan a research expedition. We understand your desire for revenge, Ambassador Kell began, using the diplomatic approaches that had worked with other species. But the Coalition cannot support the complete destruction of an entire civilization. There must be limits to acceptable responses, even in war. Hyuna leaned forward slightly, her expression politely interested. Ambassador, could you explain the acceptable limits for destroying civilian colonies? The Vorthak established those parameters when they killed 30,000 non-combatants. We are simply applying their standards more effectively. Kell's crystalline form seemed to dim slightly as it realized that normal diplomatic approaches were not going to work. These humans were not driven by emotion that could be redirected. They were operating from cold, logical conclusions about what needed to be done to ensure their species' survival. The destruction of the New Busan was a tragic act of aggression, Kell acknowledged. But responding with genocide will not bring those people back. It will only create more suffering throughout the galaxy. Minho smiled politely and activated a holographic display showing human military capabilities. Ambassador, we appreciate your concern for galactic stability. However, the situation has moved beyond the possibility of peaceful resolution. The Vorthak demonstrated that they consider human civilians to be legitimate targets for psychological warfare. We have simply accepted their rules and chosen to play by them more efficiently. Daehyun pulled up tactical information showing Vorthak military positions. Our analysis indicates that the Vorthak Empire has been planning aggressive expansion for several years. The attack on the New Busan was not an isolated incident. but part of a larger strategy to test coalition responses to civilian casualties. By responding decisively now, we prevent future attacks on other species. Ambassador Kell attempted several more diplomatic approaches, offering mediation services, suggesting limited retaliation, and proposing economic sanctions instead of military action. Each suggestion was politely considered and then rejected, with logical explanations of why peaceful solutions were no longer possible. Finally, Captain Jiwon stood and looked directly at the alien diplomat. Ambassador Kell, we understand your position and respect your desire for peaceful resolution. However, you need to understand that humanity has fundamentally changed. We are no longer the species that joined the coalition 50 years ago. She activated the main display, showing real-time images of human fleets moving into position around Vorthak worlds. The ships were not the research vessels and cargo haulers they had been days before, but transformed into instruments of destruction that could level entire civilizations. For 50 years, the galaxy has known us as explorers, researchers, and diplomats, Jiwon continued. We were happy to fill those roles because they suited our nature and our goals. But the Vorthak have taught us that peaceful species are seen as weak and vulnerable. They have shown us that there are those who will attack civilians to achieve military objectives. The captain's voice remained calm and professional, but there was something in her eyes that made Ambassador. The human attack began at exactly 0300 Galactic Standard Time, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Salmon's voice echoed across all communication frequencies as she broadcast the message that would be remembered for centuries. To the Vorthak Empire, you wanted to teach us about power. Class is now in session. What followed was not a battle in any traditional sense. The Vorthak had expected human fleets to engage their warships in honorable combat, meeting force with force in open space. Instead, they discovered that humans had no interest in honor or fair fights. They had become something far more dangerous, an intelligent species that had abandoned all moral constraints while retaining their capacity for systematic planning. Captain Jiwon stood on the bridge of the New Soul, now bristling with weapons that had never been intended to exist. The research vessel had become a dreadnought of destruction, its modified systems capable of sterilizing entire worlds. Around her, the crew worked with the same methodical precision they had once applied to scientific research, but now their focus was the complete elimination of everything that made Vorthak's civilization possible. Minho's terraforming weapons struck, first, targeting the Vorthak agricultural worlds that fed their empire. The devices that had once been designed to create breathable atmospheres for human colonies were now stripping away the air from alien planets. Within hours, worlds that had supported millions of lives became airless rocks floating in space. The Vorthak military tried to respond, but found that their enemies were not where they expected them to be. Yuna monitored the biological warfare campaign from her station, watching as her carefully designed weapons spread through Vorthak space. The same skills that had made her an expert in alien biology were now being used to create pathogens that targeted Vorthak genetic markers specifically. The diseases she had developed would not harm other species, but they were absolutely lethal to the aliens who had destroyed the New Busan. The biological agents have achieved maximum distribution, she reported with clinical detachment. Infection rates on primary Vorthak worlds are approaching 90%. The pathogens are designed to remain dormant for 72 hours, then activate simultaneously across all infected populations. Daehyun coordinated the military strikes, but these were not conventional attacks on military targets. Human forces had studied Vorthak society and identified the infrastructure that kept their civilization functioning. Power plants, communication, networks, transportation hubs, and food distribution centers were destroyed with surgical precision. The goal was not to defeat the Vorthak military, but to make it impossible for their society to continue existing. Phase 1. Targets have been eliminated, Daehyun announced. Vorthak command and control systems are offline. Their military units are isolated and unable to coordinate responses. We are moving to Phase 2, elimination of cultural and historical sites. The destruction of Vorthak cultural heritage was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the human campaign. Huna had identified every museum, library, monument, and sacred site in Vorthak space. These locations had no military value, but their destruction would ensure that even if some Vorthak individuals survived, their civilization would not. It was cultural genocide conducted with scientific precision. War Commander Thexvar tried desperately to rally his forces, but found that human tactics were impossible to counter. The aliens had been trained to fight other warrior species, enemies who would meet them in direct combat. Humans refused to play by those rules. They struck from unexpected directions, used weapons that violated every convention of warfare, and showed no interest in the honor-based combat that Vorthak society revered. The most devastating moment came when human forces captured a Vorthak command ship with Thexvar aboard. Instead of executing him quickly, they kept him alive and forced him to watch as their fleets systematically destroyed everything he had ever valued. It was the same treatment they had given Captain Jiwan and her crew when they forced them to watch the new Busan die, but applied with human efficiency and thoroughness. Soman established a communication link that allowed Thexvar to observe the destruction of his homeworld in real time. The same planet where he had been born, where his family lived, where his species had first developed the warrior culture they were so proud of, was being methodically torn apart by human weapons. "You are watching the end of your species," Jiwon told him calmly. "Every world, every ship, every individual who carries Vorthak genetic markers will be eliminated. Your empire attacked human civilians to demonstrate your power. We are demonstrating ours." Thexvar tried to invoke the traditional protocols of warfare, offering surrender, requesting negotiation, appealing to concepts of honor and mercy that had governed galactic conflicts for thousands of years. But humans had moved beyond such considerations. They were not interested in victory in any traditional sense. They wanted complete extinction of the species that had threatened their civilians. "Your surrender is meaningless," Hyuna explained, as she showed him displays of the biological weapons spreading through Vorthak space. "Surrender implies that the defeated party continues to exist in some form. We have decided that your species represents an unacceptable threat to human safety. The only logical solution is your complete removal from the galaxy. The Vorthak Empire's attempts to rally support from other species failed completely. The Galactic Coalition watched in stunned silence as humans demonstrated capabilities they had never suspected existed. The peaceful researchers and diplomats who had been valued members of galactic society for 50 years had revealed themselves to be something far more dangerous. Minho's weapons reached the Vorthak homeworld on the 4th day of the campaign. The massive planet that had been the center of their empire for thousands of years was protected by the most advanced defenses in their arsenal. It should have taken months of siege warfare to penetrate such fortifications. Instead, human terraforming. Technology simply began converting the planet's core into unstable matter. "Planetary destabilization is proceeding on schedule," Minho reported. "The Vorthak homeworld will undergo complete structural collapse in approximately 6 hours. All major population centers have been evacuated, but only because we want the survivors to witness the destruction of everything they considered permanent and eternal." As the homeworld died, taking with it the genetic archives, cultural records, and sacred sites of an entire species, other Vorthak commanders began to understand the true scope of what humans were accomplishing. This was not conquest or subjugation, but the systematic erasure of their civilization from history. Desperate Vorthak forces attempted to strike back at human civilian targets, hoping to force the attackers into negotiations by threatening innocent lives. They discovered that humans had anticipated this strategy and evacuated all vulnerable populations before beginning their campaign. Moreover, the attempted attacks on human civilians only strengthened human resolve to complete the extermination of their enemies. They tried to target our colony on New Jeju, Somin reported. The attack failed because the planet was evacuated 3 days ago. However, the attempt has been noted and will be added to the justification for our actions. Daehyun activated tactical displays showing the final phase of the campaign. Scattered Vorthak survivors were fleeing toward the Galactic Rim, hoping to escape human pursuit. But human fleets were faster, better organized, and completely committed to ensuring that no Vorthak genetic material survived to potentially threaten humanity in the future. Hunter-killer groups are tracking the remaining refugee ships, he announced. Estimated time to complete eradication, 18 hours. After that, the Vorthak Empire will exist only in historical records. War Commander Thexvar made one final attempt to understand what had happened to his empire. Why? He asked Captain Ji-won. Your species was known for compassion and mercy. How did you become capable of such complete destruction? Ji-won looked at him with something that might have been pity. You taught us that compassion and mercy are weaknesses that invite attack. You showed us that peaceful species are seen as easy targets by those who worship strength. We learned your lesson perfectly. She gestured toward the displays showing the systematic destruction of Vorthak civilization. This is what happens when you take a species that excels at research and problem-solving and give them a problem that requires the complete elimination of a threat. We approached your extinction with the same methodical intelligence we once applied to scientific discoveries. The last Vorthak ships were destroyed 16 hours later, the species that had numbered in the billions and controlled dozens of star systems was reduced to scattered genetic samples in human laboratories. Their empire, their culture, their very existence had been methodically erased by a species they had considered weak and insignificant. But the most terrifying aspect of the human campaign was not its efficiency or its thoroughness. It was the fact that when it was over, humans returned to their normal activities as if nothing extraordinary had happened. They had committed genocide with the same calm professionalism they brought to all their endeavors, and now they were ready to resume their roles as researchers, diplomats, and peaceful members of galactic society. 6 months after the destruction of the New Busan, the Vorthak Empire was nothing more than a memory preserved in galactic historical databases. Captain Ji-won stood on the bridge of the New Seoul, looking out at the empty space where the alien homeworld had once existed. The massive planet that had been the center of a galactic empire was now just scattered debris and cooling gases, another testament to what humans could accomplish when they set their minds to a problem. The transformation was complete, but it was not what other species had expected. Humans had not become permanent monsters or war-obsessed conquerors. Instead, they had demonstrated something far more unsettling: their ability to commit genocide with methodical efficiency and then return to their normal lives as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yuna worked at her science station, analyzing samples from the crystal formations that had started everything. She was back to her research, studying exotic matter and its potential applications for peaceful technology. The woman who had designed biological weapons capable of exterminating entire species was now focused on understanding how the alien crystals could improve agricultural yields on human colonies. The energy patterns are fascinating, she said, her voice carrying the same enthusiasm she had always shown for scientific discovery. If we can replicate these structures, we could solve the food shortage problems on the Outer Rim colonies. The applications for peaceful development are incredible. Minho was in the engineering bay, working on modifications that would convert their weapons back into research equipment. The same hands that had created planet-killing devices were now carefully calibrating sensors for studying stellar phenomena. His cheerful personality had returned, and he hummed softly while he worked on instruments that would help humanity explore the galaxy peacefully. The terraforming equipment should be ready for normal operations within a few days, he reported. I am removing the military modifications and restoring the original peaceful configurations. We have 3 new worlds that need atmosphere processing, and the colonists are eager to begin settlement. Somin monitored communications from across human space, coordinating the return to normal civilian activities. The young woman who had managed a campaign of extermination with administrative efficiency was now helping organize cultural exchanges with other species and facilitating peaceful trade negotiations. Ambassador Kell has requested another meeting, she announced. Several other species want to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. They seem very interested in maintaining positive relationships with us. Daehyun was converting the tactical station back to its original configuration for defensive operations only. The military specialist who had coordinated the systematic destruction of an entire civilization was now planning security arrangements for peaceful research. Missions and diplomatic conferences. The coalition is sending representatives to discuss new trade agreements, he said. Apparently, several species that had been ignoring human proposals for years are now very eager to negotiate favorable terms with us. The galaxy had indeed learned to see humanity differently. The species that had been considered weak and peaceful for 50 years was now viewed with a mixture of respect, fear, and careful caution. Other civilizations went out of their way to avoid conflicts with humans, and any species that might have considered aggressive actions against human interests carefully reconsidered their plans. Captain Ji-won received a transmission from Earth Command, where Admiral Taiho was coordinating the return of human forces to their normal peacetime activities. The massive military buildup that had enabled the destruction of the Vorthak Empire was being systematically dismantled, with weapons converted back to civilian tools and warships returned to their original purposes as research vessels and cargo haulers. The transition is proceeding smoothly, Admiral Taiho reported. Human colonies are resuming normal development activities. Scientific research is returning to pre-conflict levels. Trade relationships with allied species are stronger than ever. The galaxy seems to understand that peaceful cooperation with humanity is in everyone's best interests. What the Admiral did not need to say was that the knowledge remained. Every human who had participated in the campaign carried the understanding that their species possessed the capability for total destruction and the will to use it when necessary. The weapons had been converted back to peaceful tools, but they could be converted again if circumstances required it. A new transmission alert sounded, and Somin activated the main screen to show an incoming message from an unknown source. The image that appeared showed a species humanity had never encountered before. Elegant beings with crystalline features and bodies that seemed to glow with internal light. They were the Luminari, a peaceful civilization from the far edge of the galaxy. Greetings to the humans of the vessel New Soul, the alien speaker said. We are the Luminari Collective, and we have traveled far to make contact with your species. We have heard of your capabilities and your commitment to protecting those under your care. We seek peaceful relationships and mutually beneficial cooperation. Ji-won smiled, and it was a genuinely warm expression, free of the cold calculation, that had characterized her interactions during the war. The diplomatic training that had been pushed aside by necessity was reasserting itself, and she was genuinely pleased to encounter a new species interested in peaceful contact. Welcome to human space, she replied. We are always eager to establish friendly relationships with peaceful civilizations. We would be honored to arrange formal diplomatic meetings and discuss opportunities for cooperation and cultural exchange. The conversation that followed was everything that first contact should be: curious, respectful, and focused on the potential benefits of peaceful interaction between different species. The Luminari were interested in human scientific research, while humanity was fascinated by Luminari energy manipulation technology that could revolutionize space travel. As the initial diplomatic protocols were established, Ji-won reflected on how much had changed since the destruction of the New Busan. Humanity had learned that they were capable of terrible things when pushed beyond their limits, but they had also learned that their greatest strength lay not in destruction, but in their ability to choose restraint when dealing with peaceful species. Huna looked up from her research and smiled at the diplomatic exchange taking place on the main screen. "It is good to see that there are still species interested in peaceful cooperation," she said. "The galaxy is much better when we can focus on discovery and mutual understanding rather than conflict." Minho nodded from his engineering station. "Our technology works so much better when it is used to create rather than destroy. These new energy systems the Luminari are describing could revolutionize how we build space habitats." Soman was already making arrangements for formal diplomatic meetings and cultural exchanges. "I am scheduling a series of conferences where both species can share information about their histories, technologies, and social structures. This could be the beginning of a very productive relationship." Daehyun monitored the security aspects of the contact, but his preparations were focused on protection rather than aggression. "I am establishing standard diplomatic security protocols. Nothing aggressive, just reasonable precautions to ensure the safety of all participants in the upcoming meetings." As the diplomatic preparations continued, Captain Ji-won received a private communication from the Luminari representative. The alien's expression was serious as it spoke about matters that went beyond normal diplomatic courtesy. "Captain Ji-won, we must tell you that we did not seek contact with humanity by accident," the luminary said. "We have been monitoring galactic communications, and we learned of what happened to the Vorthak Empire. We came here because we believe that a species capable of such decisive action when threatened would also be capable of protecting others who seek peace." The alien paused, its crystalline features shifting slightly. "There are other aggressive species in our region of the galaxy, civilizations that prey on peaceful worlds and enslave weaker peoples. We had hoped to find allies who would stand with us against such threats. Your response to the Vorthak attack suggests that humanity might be willing to protect others who cannot protect themselves." Ji-won considered the request carefully. The old humanity might have responded with offers of mediation or suggestions for peaceful resolution. But the new humanity, shaped by the lessons learned from the Vorthak Empire, understood that some problems could only be solved through the application of overwhelming force. "The Luminari Collective will find that humanity is indeed committed to protecting peaceful civilizations," she replied. "We have learned that predatory species respond only to consequences, not to diplomacy or appeals for mercy. If there are those who threaten your people, we will be happy to demonstrate the same lessons we taught the Vorthak Empire." The luminary representative's relief was obvious. This is what we had hoped to hear. "The galaxy is a dangerous place for peaceful species, but perhaps that is changing now that humanity has shown what happens to those who prey on the innocent." As the communication ended, Ji-won looked at her crew and saw the same quiet satisfaction in their eyes.